Everyone remembers Elvis for the shows he finished. Very few people know about the night he could not. It happened in a room full of noise and light, with cameras flashing and drinks clinking, when one tiny flash of gold on a stranger's hand made the most famous voice in the world fall completely silent. He was halfway through a song he had sung hundreds of times. The band knew every beat. The backup singers knew every harmony. The audience knew every word. It was smooth, polished, automatic until Elvis saw her ring. His eyes caught it first. A small gold band lifted just above the sea of reaching hands, catching the spotlight for half a second. That should have meant nothing. He had seen diamonds, crowns, fur coats, and neon suits in Vegas. But this ring was different. He knew it before he even knew why. His voice thinned on the next line. The note did not break, it simply faded like someone turning down a dial. The band kept playing, confused but trained to move on. People laughed, assuming he was joking or teasing them with a dramatic pause. They had no idea that, in that moment, Elvis Presley was no longer singing to a crowd of thousands. He was starring at a promise that came back to life. For years, he had one rule: no matter what happens, the show does not stop. He had pushed through fevers, heartbreak, equipment failure, even pain that would have put most performers in a hospital bed. He risked his own body rather than risk disappointing the people who came to see him. On that night in that room, a single ring made him break the only rule he truly lived by. Why that ring? Why that woman? And why did he look at her as if he had just seen a ghost? The crowd never got those answers. Most of them went home with a funny little story. They saw Elvis freeze, smirk, mumble something they could not quite hear, then pull himself together and carry on. They thought it was a forgotten lyric, a dizzy spell, maybe even a joke that did not quite land. To them, it was a glitch in an otherwise perfect show. But that is not what it was to him. Because long before she raised her hand, long before that ring caught the light, a letter had already reached him. A letter that should have been one more piece of fan mail in a mountain of envelopes. A letter he tried to put down. A letter he carried anyway. And in that letter, there was one line he could not forget. We will come back to that line. For now, hold on to the image of Elvis at the microphone, staring into the dark, his song stuck in his throat, the band playing on behind him, and a single gold ring shining up at him from the front rows. That is where the world thinks this story begins. It does not. To understand what happened that night, you have to see where Elvis was in his life when that ring finally found him. Not the myth, not the poster on the wall, the man. By the mid-70s, Elvis lived inside a strange kind of prison. On paper, he had everything: sold-out shows, a permanent home on the Las Vegas Strip, a name that did not need an introduction anywhere on Earth. When he walked on stage, the room shifted. When he smiled, people cried. When he wiped sweat from his forehead and tossed the scarf, grown adults fought like children to catch it. Inside, he was tired. The schedule never let up. Hotel rooms blurred into one another. Mornings started late because nights ended too late. The jumpsuits got heavier, the routines more intense, the demands sharper. Managers wanted more dates. Casinos wanted more shows. The Colonel wanted the next deal, the next contract, the next check. Elvis kept saying yes. It was easier than saying no. The show had to go on. And yet, somewhere inside that routine, he started feeling haunted. Not by fame, by people. People he did not know by name. People who lined up outside his gates. People who wrote their hearts down in letters and addressed them to a man they had never met, but felt like they had known all their lives. Elvis did not read every letter, no one could, but the ones that reached him stayed. He came from a world where nobody had much. He knew what it meant to worry about rent or medicine or food on the table. So when fans wrote about sickness or loss or a son who died in a car accident, he did not see fans. He saw his own neighbors from Tupelo. He saw his mother's worried face. He saw the boy he had been and the life he might have lived if things had gone differently. Sometimes he sent money quietly. Sometimes he sent flowers. Sometimes he picked up the phone and called a stranger in the middle of their worst night and said, in that deep, familiar voice, "This is Elvis." Those stories rarely made the headlines. They were just folded away into the lives of the people who received them. But for every letter he answered, there were hundreds he never had the chance to touch. That was the part that kept him awake. The idea that somewhere out there, someone was waiting for something from him that he might never give. An autograph, a visit, or just a moment of being seen. He knew he walked past people who needed that moment every day. He felt the weight of those missed faces more than anyone could guess. The letter that would bring him to a dead stop on stage did not scream for attention. It was not written in glitter pen. It was not angry. It did not ask for money. At first glance, it looked like every other quiet envelope. A woman's handwriting, a simple address, a small life reaching toward a very big one. Inside, the tone was different. She did not ask him to fall in love with her. She did not ask him to save her. She did not even ask that he write back. She only asked him to remember. She wrote about a night many years earlier when she sat in the cheap seats at one of his early shows, clutching the hand of the man she loved. She wrote about how his song filled that small hall and that, for 90 minutes, they forgot how hard their lives were, how many bills waited on the kitchen table, how worried the doctors were. She described herself so modestly that Elvis later joked she almost hid from her own story. "You probably did not see me," she wrote, "but you saved us that night." And then she wrote about what happened after, about hospital corridors, about machines and monitors, about that same man's wedding ring resting in her palm when his hand could not hold it anymore. Elvis read those lines slowly. He knew he received letters from widows, from parents, from people who lost someone they loved. He had read many before, but then he reached the sentence that made him stop. "You will not remember me," she wrote, "but if I ever get to see you again, you will know me by the ring." He could have closed the letter there, he almost did. Instead, he read on. She explained that she wore that ring every day, a thin gold band with a tiny imperfection near the setting that only she seemed to notice. She told him that the first time she heard him sing after the funeral, she took the ring off her chain, put it on her finger, and whispered to herself, "If I ever get close enough, I will raise my hand. If he sees me, I will know I was not invisible." She did not demand that he see her. She did not threaten to blame him if he never did. She wrote the opposite. "If you never notice me," she said, "I will still be grateful. Your songs have already done more for me than you know. But if you do see the ring, and if you pause even just for a second, I will know that somewhere in all that light and noise, I still exist to you as a person." That was the line he could not put down. In a world where millions screamed his name, here was someone asking for a single silent pause. He folded the letter and set it on the table. Then he picked it up again. He moved it from the table to his pocket, from his pocket to his suitcase, from his suitcase to his dressing room mirror. Over the next weeks, that letter did something strange. It stopped being a piece of paper and started feeling like a promise. He knew he could miss her. He knew he might never see that ring. He also knew that if he ever did, if that flash of gold ever cut through the spotlights and found his eyes, he would have to decide in a split second what her existence meant to him. Was she one more face in the dark, or was she someone he owed a moment of honesty to? That question followed him into the years when his body began to carry the cost of everything he had given away. Into the long nights where he watched television with the sound off and listened instead to the noise in his own head. Into the shows where he smiled and joked and made the crowd feel like they were all old friends, even when he felt miles away. This is what makes that night with the ring matter so much. It was not just about a forgotten lyric or a dizzy spell. It was about what happens when a man who has spent his life giving himself away to a world of strangers suddenly comes face to face with one stranger who remembers everything he promised, even when he does not. That is why this story is more than a strange moment in a concert. It is a window into who Elvis really was when the curtains closed and the headlines faded. It has taken years for small pieces of this story to surface. A memory from a band member, a line from a security guard, a faded photograph where Elvis seems to lean toward someone just out of frame. The woman's own words passed down quietly, almost shyly, as if she was still not sure she deserved to be part of his history at all. Put together, they give us something rare, a look at the way Elvis carried other people's pain, not just his own. This is the side that does not fit on a poster, the side that worried about the letters he could not answer, the side that felt guilty for the names he forgot, the side that believed deep down that every person in the audience had a story just as heavy as his and that he would never have the time to hear them all. On the night he saw her ring, that belief became real. Tonight, we are going back into that moment with him. We are going to slow time down around that microphone and ask the questions the crowd never had time to ask. Who was she really? How did her letter find him? What did he say to her when the music finally stopped? Most of all, we are going to follow that single gold ring back through the years, to the first time their lives crossed, long before Vegas, long before the jumpsuits, when Elvis was still learning what it meant to stand on a stage and look out at a sea of strangers who all wanted something from him. Because the night he stopped mid-song was not an accident. It was the end of a thread that started much earlier in a smaller room with a younger Elvis, a young couple in the cheap seats, and a promise that none of them knew would echo through the rest of his life. That is where this story really begins. The smaller room he remembered did not have chandeliers or velvet seats. It smelled like floor polish and popcorn. If you had walked in, you would never guess that a thread starting there would one day stop a show in Las Vegas. He almost forgot it himself until the night he saw her ring. It was a town on the way up, not the top. Folding chairs, wooden stage. A younger Elvis in a simple suit, hair slicked back, still surprised every time a crowd screamed his name. He had not yet learned how to hide his nerves. You could see them in the way he wrung the microphone cord before the first song. In the third row near the aisle, a young couple sat so close their shoulders touched. She wore a plain dress, nothing fancy. He wore his best shirt, the one saved for weddings and Sundays. They had saved money they did not have for those tickets. Rent could wait. This was the night they would talk about when they were old. Elvis did not notice them at first. He saw a blur of faces, a line of bobbing heads, the usual mix of shy and wild. Then between songs he scanned the crowd and his eye caught the way she looked at him, not like a movie star, like someone who had needed this night so badly she had almost talked herself out of it. He saw her lean her head on the man's shoulder during a slow song. He saw the way the man mouthed the words under his breath, afraid to sing out loud, afraid to ruin the moment. For a second, Elvis felt something strange. He was singing to them, specifically, in a way he could not quite explain. There was a glint of gold on her hand even then. A new ring, still bright, not yet dulled by dishes or time. It flashed when she clapped, just enough for the stage lights to catch it. Elvis registered that detail without knowing he had stored it away. After the show, the band rushed to pack up. Elvis stood near a side door, sweat cooling on his skin, body humming from the energy of the set. Security tried to keep the line moving, but he always slowed them down. He wanted to shake a few hands, look a few people in the eye. They stepped into that line, the young couple still holding hands, the ring caught between their fingers. When they reached him, she froze. He smiled first. "Y'all have a good time tonight?" he asked, in that easy drawl that made strangers feel like cousins. She nodded but could not speak. The man beside her saved her. "You have no idea what that meant to us," he said. We needed this." Elvis felt the weight behind those words. He did not ask for details. He had learned that sometimes people only wanted to say thank you, not confess their whole lives. He reached out, took her hand, and gave it a gentle squeeze. The ring pressed against his palm. For a tiny second, the world shrank to the circle of warm skin and cool metal. "Take care of each other," he said. "That is what matters." Then the line moved and they were gone. For him, it was one of many nights. For her, it was the night. She went home and told the story over and over, how he looked directly at her, how he told them to take care of each other, how when he touched her hand, she felt like someone had reached into her chest and straightened something that had been crooked for years. They did their best to follow that advice. They worked, they argued, they laughed, they paid bills slowly. When her husband started to feel tired all the time, they blamed work. When the doctors said it was something else, something worse, something with long names and short odds, the ring he had slipped onto her finger on their wedding day became more than a symbol. It became something to hold on to when there was nothing left to hold. In hospital waiting rooms, Elvis's songs played softly from small radios. She brought an old tape player and used it like a shield. When her husband felt strong enough, he would tap his fingers on the bed rails in time with the music. Sometimes he would say, "Remember what he told us, take care of each other. You are doing that, you know." When he was gone, the ring felt heavier. She took it off her finger and threaded it onto a chain, wearing it over her heart. Some days the pressure comforted her, some days it felt like a stone. That was when she started writing. The first few letters never reached him. They were swallowed by the machine that handled fan mail, stacks of envelopes, overworked assistants sorting boxes that cared more about zip codes than human stories. She did not know that. She thought he had read them or might someday, and that was enough. Years passed, Elvis climbed from theaters to arenas to Vegas showrooms. The world turned him into a symbol of rebellion, of America, of excess, of tragedy. People argued about his music, his movies, his relationships, his weight. Fewer people asked what it felt like to carry all that attention without any real privacy. He developed his own rules to survive it. Some were practical, some were emotional. One of them, the one he repeated to every band, every crew, every newcomer, was simple. No matter what happens out there, we finish the song. He meant it. He sang through nights when his heart was breaking, through fevers that made the floor sway, through technical disasters, through personal humiliation. There was a night when he got bad news 5 minutes before walking on stage. He took a breath, straightened his shoulders, and went out anyway. The band saw the lines in his face, deeper than usual. The crowd saw only the grin. Later, in private, he admitted the truth. "If I stop once," he said, "I will start thinking about myself instead of them, and they did not come here for that." That rule kept him safe in a strange way. It gave him something to lean on when his own feelings felt too big. As long as he kept singing, he did not have to look too closely at the ache inside. But that rule depended on distance. He needed the audience to be a blur, a wave, a sound, not 1,000 separate lives with 1,000 private heartbreaks, because if he ever let himself see them clearly, he knew he would not make it through. That was why her letter cut so deep when it finally, improbably, found him. It arrived during the years when Las Vegas had become both his stage and his cage. His face stared at him from casino billboards, his name burned in neon. He could walk through secret hallways and never see the sun. The hotel felt like a golden maze designed to keep him performing and keep the money flowing. On one of those afternoons when he drifted between sleep and rehearsal, someone left a small stack of letters on his table. Most were the usual mix: requests, confessions, snapshots, drawings from children. His eyes skimmed them, feeling grateful and guilty at the same time. Then he saw the handwriting. It looked like someone trying very hard to write neatly, like they did not want to waste his time. He opened it, read the first lines, and felt the past rush in. She reminded him of that small-town show. She described the cheap seats, the folding chairs, the way his voice had bounced off bare walls. She wrote about the line after the show, the brief touch, the simple sentence, "Take care of each other." When he reached the part about the hospital, about the ring slipping from one hand to another, his chest tightened. He saw the scene as if he had been there, even though he had not. Then came the line he already carried in his mind. "If I ever get to see you again," she wrote, "you will know me by the ring." This time she added something more. She explained that she had been sick herself, that the doctors had started using the same long words they once used for her husband, that she did not know how much time she had, that a friend had promised to take her to Vegas if she could stay strong enough to make the trip. "I am not asking you to call," she wrote. "I am not asking you to send anything. I am only asking you to look once. If you see the ring and you pause, even for a heartbeat, I will know I was not invisible to you." He put the letter down and stared at the wall. The air in the room felt thick. He thought about all the people he had not seen, all the hands he had not shaken, all the letters that never made it to his table. He thought about the younger version of himself squeezing her hand, telling them to take care of each other like it was easy. Part of him wanted to send money. Part of him wanted to send tickets. Part of him knew that if he did, it might trigger a flood he could not control. Thousands of other letters waited on tables, in boxes, in drawers. He could not fix every story. Just that thought almost broke him. So he did the only thing he could promise honestly. He folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket pocket. From that day forward, the crowd was not a blur anymore. On stage, he still joked, still flirted, still hit the notes that made the room explode. But in between songs, when the lights softened and he squinted into the darkness, he was not just basking, he was searching. He scanned the first few rows for a hand raised just a little differently. Not wild, not grabbing, just steady, purposeful. A hand with a ring that matched the description that now lived in his mind. He told no one at first. This was his private mission. His penance and his hope rolled into one. As weeks went by and no gold band pierced the dark, he grew restless. He found himself thinking about her when he should have been thinking about song order or costume changes or contracts. Night after night, he imagined her in some other city, in some other hospital, holding that ring and losing strength. He started talking in half phrases to the people closest to him. "If you ever see a lady with a ring like this," he told a bodyguard, tracing the shape in the air, "bring her backstage. Do not ask questions." The man nodded, confused but loyal. New intrigue settled into the halls. They did not know the story, but they knew he was watching for something. There were false alarms. One night he thought he saw it, a flash of gold near the front. His heart jumped into his throat. He stumbled over a word. By the time he got his bearings and looked again, it was gone. After the show, he asked one of the ushers, "Did you see a woman down front with a simple gold band, not fancy, just a ring that looked like it had lived a life?" The usher shrugged. "Mr. Presley, there were a lot of rings." Another night, someone pointed out a woman in the lobby, clutching a letter and wearing a ring. His chest tightened. When the security guard brought her closer, he felt a wave of relief and terror. Then she spoke. "Mr. Presley, my husband proposed during Love Me Tender," she said. "This is the ring from that night." It was a beautiful moment, but it was not her. He smiled, signed her program, wished her well. When she left, he sank into a chair. The letter in his pocket seemed to grow heavier with every near miss. His own life did not slow down for this private hunt. If anything, the pressure grew sharper. Managers pushed for more shows, promoters promised bigger paydays. The casino wanted him to be the endless attraction that kept people drinking and gambling. His body sent warnings, pain, exhaustion, shortness of breath, that he drowned out with habit and pills. His unspoken rule, "We finish the song," started to sound more like a dare to himself than a promise to the audience. Still, he clung to it, because if he did not hold himself to something, he worried everything would fall apart. The idea of breaking that rule scared him almost as much as the idea of never seeing her. There were nights he lay awake in his suite, the desert dark pressing against the windows, wondering if she had already gone. If the ring now sat in a drawer somewhere unworn, if he had missed his chance without ever knowing it. And yet he could not shake the image, a woman in the crowd, a hand lifted calmly, a ring catching the light. One afternoon, before another long string of Vegas shows, he took the letter out again. The paper had softened at the folds. The ink had faded a little where his thumb always rested. He read it from start to finish. When he reached the line about the pause, the line where she promised she would not blame him if he never noticed her but would feel seen if he did, something inside him shifted. He walked over to the mirror, stared at his own reflection, and said softly, "If I see you, honey, I will stop. I swear I will stop." It was the first crack in the rule he had lived by. From that moment on, the search became more intense. He changed his entrance so he could walk past the edge of the stage and look out before the first song. He lingered longer between numbers, pretending to adjust his belt or his mic, actually scanning faces. People thought he was just soaking in the applause. They had no idea he was looking for one woman who did not want fame or money or a story to tell at parties. She wanted a pause. The night that would finally bring them into the same room arrived like any other on the calendar. To the hotel, it was another sold-out show. To the fans, it was a date circled months in advance. To Elvis, it felt different the moment he woke up. He could not explain it. There was a weight in his chest that was not only physical. A sense, quiet but insistent, that something long delayed was going to demand an answer. He changed the set list that afternoon. He moved one particular song, the one she had mentioned in her letter, the one from that small town hall so many years ago, from the middle of the show to a more exposed place. Closer to the front, closer to his nerves. Before he put on his jumpsuit, he opened the letter one last time. He read the date. He ran his finger under her name. He folded it carefully and tucked it not into his jacket pocket this time, but under the edge of his stage belt, close to his stomach, where the fabric pressed against his skin. "Do not let me miss you," he murmured. Not sure if he was talking to her, to God, or to the younger version of himself who had once told a couple in the cheap seats to take care of each other and then walked away. In the hallway outside his room, the usual pre-show dance started. Footsteps, voices, the low murmur of the crowd seeping up through the building, a knock on the door. Showtime. He took a breath, the rule echoed in his head. We finished the song, the promise from the letter echoed even louder. If you pause, I will know I am not invisible. He stepped into the corridor, the sound of the audience swelling with every step toward the stage. The letter pressed against him like a small, urgent heartbeat. He did not know yet that, somewhere beyond the curtain, a woman had already taken her seat, her hand resting on her lap. On that hand, a simple gold ring waited for the lights to go down. He did not see the ring when he first walked out. That would have been too easy. For the first few songs, the woman he had been searching for was just another shadow in the dark, sitting quietly while the room roared around her. From the moment he stepped onto that stage, he felt that strange extra weight, the letter against his skin. The thought that somewhere out there one pair of eyes was not here for the show but for a promise. He brushed it aside for the opening number. Muscle memory took over. The band kicked in, the horns shouted, the room rose to its feet. He went through the early set like always. Fast song, joke, scarf to the front row. He flashed that sideways grin. People screamed his name. For a while he almost forgot he was searching. Then the quiet parts started. Between numbers, he drifted closer to the edge of the stage. He let his gaze sweep over the front tables. He saw couples with drinks, gamblers with pockets full of chips, tourists with cameras ready. He saw sequins, tuxedos, bright lipstick, polished nails. Rings everywhere, too many rings. For a second, doubt slid in. What if she had not made it? What if the doctors had been right and she never left that hospital bed? What if the only place she ever saw him again was in a rerun on a television at the end of a long hallway? He swallowed. The band started the next intro. It was time for the song. It was the same one he had sung in that small hall all those years ago. The one she had written about. The one that had filled a room of folding chairs and cheap tickets with enough hope for a young couple to feel rich for 90 minutes. He wrapped his hand around the microphone. The first line came out steady. The second line felt heavier. With every word, he fought the urge to scan the crowd instead of sinking into the lyric. He knew if he let himself look too hard, the song would slip away from him. Then, at the start of the second verse, it happened. A hand rose, not in a wild wave, not in desperation, but in a calm, deliberate motion. It lifted just high enough to be seen. The fingers curled slightly as if protecting something. The ring caught the light. He saw it before he saw her face. Simple band, modest stone, a tiny imperfection near the setting that the spotlight could not hide. It matched the picture he had carried in his mind so perfectly that for a heartbeat he forgot where he was. The room fell away. The band turned into a distant echo. All that remained was the flash of gold and the memory of a line written in a shaky hand, "You will know me by the ring." His throat closed. The word he was singing thinned out and vanished. The microphone stayed at his mouth, but no sound came. The band played the next chord, then the next, waiting for him to fall back in. He did not. People in the back laughed, thinking he had done it on purpose. Maybe he was joking, they thought. Maybe he would throw out a one-liner or repeat the line with a wink. They had seen him play with lyrics before. The ones near the front felt something different. They saw the way his eyes locked onto that one raised hand. They saw his expression change from performer to man. It was not a grin. It was not an act. It was shock, recognition, and something like fear. He took a step closer to the edge of the stage. The band kept going because that was what they knew how to do. When in doubt, play. The rule he had given them lived in their bones. You do not stop. He raised his free hands slightly, a tiny motion that told them what he could not say. The guitarist faltered, the drummer softened, the horns died out mid-note, the music sagged and then fell completely silent. The room did not. Voices rushed into the sudden hole where the song had been. People called his name, some clapped, some whistled. A few shouted out the titles of the songs they wanted next. Someone laughed loudly, then stopped when they realized no one else joined in. Elvis did not look at any of them. He kept his eyes on the ring. He walked straight toward the edge of the stage until he could see her face clearly at last. Older now, lines at the corners of her mouth that matched the years in his, eyes that had seen more hospital hallways than headlines. She was not glamorous by Vegas standards. She looked like someone who had lived a real life. He saw the tremor in her hand. He saw the way her lips moved silently, as if she was still rehearsing what she would say if he ever noticed her. He lowered the microphone a little. When he spoke, his voice barely left his throat. "It is you, is it not?" he whispered. The people at the next table leaned forward, straining to hear. The ones in the back could only see his head bent, like he was praying. She nodded, too choked to answer out loud. Her eyes filled. She did the only thing she had promised to do. She held up the ring a little higher. For a second, he forgot that hundreds of other eyes were on him. It felt like that small town hall again, only now the cheap seats were covered in velvet and the stage lights were hotter. The memory folded over the present and he stood at the center of both. He raised the microphone again, but instead of jumping back into the song, he said, soft but clear enough for the nearest rows to hear, "I remember you." The front tables went quiet. Most people in the room did not understand the meaning of those three words. They sounded like a sweet line, maybe a bit of charm for a fan. They did not know that for her, they were the answer to a question she had carried for years. Was I invisible to you? He reached out his hand toward her, palm down, fingers spread as far as he could without leaving the stage. Security tensed for a moment, unsure if someone might rush forward. She did not. She simply stood, reached up, and let his fingertips brush hers. The ring pressed into his skin again, just as it had on that first night. For a blink, the contact grounded him. Then it broke and time snapped back into place. He could feel the rule he had lived by crumbling. The show had stopped. The song lay broken on the floor between them. People were waiting. They wanted him to say something funny, turn this moment into a story they could repeat at dinner tomorrow. He felt no urge to entertain anyone else. "Thank you for keeping your promise," he said to her quietly. "I am sorry it took me so long to keep mine." There was no punchline, no big gesture, just that. Then he turned, gave the band a small nod, and pulled the microphone back to his mouth. He started the verse again from the beginning, but something in his voice had changed. The rough edges were more honest. The softened phrases were less about showmanship and more about survival. He did finish the song. The rule was not broken completely, but everyone who heard it that night knew there was a crack in it now, a visible line where it had almost given way. The crowd roared when he hit the final note. Many thought they had witnessed a simple emotional stumble, the kind that makes a performance feel special. They did not know that the meaning of that song could never be the same for him again. From the back of the room, a casino executive muttered that he had gone off script. In the wings, a stagehand wiped away tears without understanding why. At the front table, a woman with a simple ring on her finger sank back into her chair, hands shaking, heart pounding with a relief so deep it almost hurt. For her, the show could have ended right there. For him, it could not. He went on with the set. He told a few jokes. He bantered with the band. He sang the big hits and gave out more scarves. To most of the audience, the strange pause in the middle felt like a small human moment in an otherwise flawless machine. Behind the charm, he was somewhere else. Every time he glanced toward the front, his eyes found her again. He saw the way her shoulders had relaxed. He noticed that she smiled now, not with the tightness of someone who expects disappointment, but with the softness of someone who has already received what they came for. When the show finally ended and he left the stage, the applause chased him down the hallway like a wave losing strength. The door to his dressing room closed. The noise faded. The world shrank again. He stood in the quiet and felt the full weight of what had just happened. The colonel came in first, already complaining. What was that out there? You cannot stop like that, son. They pay good money for a smooth show. You start doing that every night, they will think you are sick or something. Elvis looked at him with tired eyes. I was not stopping for them, he said. I was stopping for her. The colonel did not understand. Maybe he did not want to. He muttered about schedules and reputations, then left to talk to hotel management. As the door closed, Elvis turned to one of his closest men. Find her, he said. The lady with the ring, bring her back here if she wants to come. That man nodded and went. The minutes that followed moved slowly. The laughter from the corridor felt distant. The buzz of the hotel air conditioning seemed louder than it should have been. Elvis sat down, then stood up again. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw sweat lines, tired eyes, and a flicker of something like peace. There was a knock. The door opened a few inches. His aide leaned in. She is here, he said. Do you want to see her alone? Elvis thought about the endless parade of people who passed through these rooms. Businessmen, promoters, reporters, acquaintances. He thought about how guarded he had become, how careful he was about who saw what. Just you, he said. Stay, in case she needs anything. The woman stepped inside, clutching her purse in one hand. Up close, she looked smaller than she had in the lights of the showroom. The ring still sat on her finger. She glanced around, then at him, and you could see the moment she realized that this was not Elvis Presley, the idea. This was simply a man in a jumpsuit, tired and human. I did not mean to cause trouble, she said quickly, as if she might be scolded. I really did just come to hear you sing. He shook his head, almost smiling. You did not cause trouble, he said. You stopped me before I broke my own heart. They sat. For a while she did most of the talking. The words poured out like water held back too long. She told him about that first concert, how they had laughed at the people who screamed and then found themselves screaming too. She told him about the hospital, about the long nights when his records kept playing because silence felt too loud. She told him about the day her husband pressed the ring into her palm and said, "You keep this. When you look at it, remember that once in our lives we felt completely alive." She described the first letters she wrote and never knew if he saw. She described the doctors' faces when they talked in low voices outside her room. She described the day her friend said, "If you can make it to Christmas, I will get you to Vegas. I promise." He listened, really listened. He did not glance at the clock or at the door or at his reflection. He watched her hands as they twisted the fabric of her dress. He saw how often her fingers brushed the ring without her noticing. When she mentioned the line from her letter, the one about the pause, she looked up at him with something like apology in her eyes. It sounds silly now, she said. Asking you to stop in front of all those people, you have so much on you already. I had no right to ask for that. He shook his head slowly. You had every right, he said. You asked for 1 second of my life, you gave me years of yours, that seems fair to me. In that moment, the guilt he had carried about letters unanswered and faces unseen did not disappear, but it shifted. It felt less like a weight crushing him and more like a responsibility he could at least try to honor when he had the chance. He reached out his hand again. May I see it, he asked. She slid the ring off her finger and placed it in his open palm. He closed his fingers around it. It was lighter than he expected. For a long beat, neither of them spoke. He thought about the boy in the small town hall who had told them to take care of each other without understanding how hard that would be. He thought about the man he was now, older, worn down, still trying to be everything to everyone and ending up feeling like he was not enough for anyone. I am sorry I was not there when you lost him, he said quietly. If I could have been in that hospital room, I would have sung for you both until they threw me out. She smiled through her tears. You were there, she said, on that little radio on the shelf. On the night he died, your song was playing. He squeezed my hand one last time on the last note. I think he waited for it. He looked down at the ring again. No award, no record, no sold-out Vegas contract could ever compete with that sentence. He pressed the ring back into her hand. You keep this, he said. You earned every ounce of what it stands for, but I need you to do one thing for me. She looked puzzled. Do not disappear, he said. When you tell this story, do not make yourself smaller than you are. You belonged in that room as much as anyone tonight. In the corridor, life went on, people joked. The casino counted money. The hotel staff reset the showroom for the next crowd. Inside that small dressing room, time felt different. Eventually, the conversation had to end. Her strength was limited, so was his. She stood, thanked him more times than she needed to. He hugged her gently, careful not to squeeze too hard. For a moment, his chin rested on the top of her head, and he felt the same fierce, protective tenderness he had once felt for his own mother. Then she stepped back, wiped her eyes, and walked out, ring back on her finger. The door closed, he was alone again. He sat there for a long while, the sounds of the hotel faint and distant. The letter still rested under his belt, warm from his skin. The rule about never stopping mid-song lay in pieces at his feet, next to the new understanding that sometimes the most important part of a performance is the silence. He reached into his costume, pulled out the folded paper, and smoothed it on his knee. The ink had blurred in one spot where sweat or a tear had touched it earlier in the night. He read the line about invisibility again, knowing he could never hear the word crowd the same way after this. He had followed through on one promise. For one woman on one night, he had stopped the world and made room for her story. It felt right, it also scared him. Because once you admit that one person in the audience is real, it becomes impossible to pretend that the rest are only noise. The night she walked out of that dressing room, the show was over, but something in Elvis was still turning. Once you have looked one person in the eye and admitted, you are not noise, you cannot unlearn that. The crowd will keep coming, the machine will keep grinding. The question is what that kind of moment leaves behind after the lights go out. Here is where the story takes a quiet turn most people never hear about. In the weeks that followed, people around him noticed small changes. Nothing dramatic enough for headlines, just tiny shifts in the way he moved through his own kingdom. He lingered a little longer before the first song, as if listening for something beneath the screams. He seemed slower to make jokes at the audience's expense, quicker to let a serious line land and sit in the air. Band members later said there were nights when he would introduce a ballad, and his voice would soften on a single word, like he was talking more to one person than to thousands. No one in the room knew that in his mind, he might have been back in that hospital room she described, or replaying the feeling of that ring pressing into his palm. He did not tell many people what had really happened that night with the pause. A few heard parts of it. A bodyguard knew he had been searching for someone for months. A member of the entourage heard him say, "I finally found her," without explaining who her was. To most of the world, the story stayed hidden inside the much louder narrative of his life. And that is the strange thing about legacy. The loudest stories often rise to the top, but that does not mean they are the truest ones. Over time, the official version of Elvis hardened around certain images. The swiveling hips, the army uniform, the black leather comeback, the jumpsuits, the pills, the bathroom at Graceland. Those are the markers people point to when they talk about him in documentaries and books. What gets lost are the quiet decisions that never made the papers, the private rules he kept for himself, the letters he did read, the hands he did hold. The moments like this one, when a man who lived under constant scrutiny chose to risk an imperfect show just to keep a promise no one else knew about. For years, the only proof that night even happened lived in memory. A woman's memory of a song that stopped. A security guard's memory of being told, "Find her." A faded entry in a fan's diary, describing how the whole room went still and how Elvis's voice sounded different after that. Later, when people tried to piece it together, they discovered small echoes. A date on a show schedule. A note in a road manager's book about a pause mid-song, unusual but powerful. A photograph from the crowd where, if you looked closely, you could see him leaning forward towards someone just out of frame, his eyes softer than the showman's glare. No single piece would convince a skeptic. Taken together, they form the outline of something you can feel, even if you cannot see every detail. And that brings us to you, listening now, decades later. By the time most of us heard the name Elvis Presley, he was already more symbol than person. An icon on a poster, a punchline about jumpsuits, a cautionary tale about fame. We inherit that version without even realizing it. This story asks you to hold a different image alongside it. Imagine him not at the height of a TV special, but in the middle of a long Vegas run, tired, overworked body failing him. Imagine him on a stage where everything is designed to keep the show running smoothly, to keep drinks flowing and the casino floor busy. Then imagine him seeing one small ring and choosing in that moment to let the whole machine stutter. He knew what it might cost. Casino executives do not like interruptions. Managers do not like unpredictability. Gossip columns love any sign that a star is losing it. He risked all of that for a pause that meant nothing to the crowd and everything to her. You can feel fear in that choice. Fear that if he looked away, he would regret it forever. Fear that deep down, he had already missed too many chances to see the people his music carried. You can also feel pride. Pride in the idea that he was still, underneath everything, the boy from Tupelo who believed that ordinary people mattered. After his death, many people went searching for explanations. Why did he burn so bright and fall so hard? Why did someone with so much still feel so alone? Stories like this do not answer those questions fully, but they change how we ask them. Instead of seeing only a man destroyed by excess, you see someone who never stopped wrestling with the weight of other people's hopes. Instead of seeing only a superstar trapped by his own legend, you see someone who could still, even near the end, stop the music to acknowledge one small life in a room full of strangers. Some fans who later heard the story of the ring began to see their own memories differently. That time he looked their way during a song, that autograph he quickly signed in the rain, that tiny moment in a concert when his expression changed for reasons no one around them noticed. They started to ask, what if he saw me more than I thought he did? That is part of his legacy too. In a world where celebrity often feels cold and distant, Elvis's story still carries these flashes of deep, almost painful connection. He did not always handle that weight well. No one could. But nights like this show that he tried, in his own flawed way, to honor the people who gave him their love. And what about hers? We do not have a long epilogue for the woman with the ring. We do not have a book deal or a talk show appearance or a documentary built around her face. That feels right. She never wanted to be famous. She wanted to be seen once clearly by someone who had already meant so much to her life. She got that. She walked away with her ring and her story, carrying a memory most people would never believe if she told it. A memory of the night the band kept playing, the crowd kept cheering, and the biggest star in the room went quiet for her. Somewhere years later, she probably told it one more time, maybe to a niece or a neighbor or a nurse, maybe to someone who had only ever known Elvis as a tabloid headline. I was there, she could say. I saw him stop. This is the kind of detail that shifts a legend a few degrees, just enough to let more light in, just enough to remind us that history is not only written in charts and contracts, but in private promises kept in the dark. So when people ask what Elvis's legacy is, there are many answers. The music, the movies, the fashion, the influence on everything that came after, all of that is true. But there is also this: on at least one night, he chose a person over perfection. He chose a promise over polish. He chose to break his own rule so one woman would never again have to wonder if she was invisible. That is not the kind of legacy you can measure in gold records. It is the kind you measure in the way a story makes your chest tighten when you hear it, even decades later. And now there is one more layer. Because you were not in that Vegas showroom, you did not feel the floor vibrate under your feet when the band stopped. You did not see the ring flash in the light, yet the story has reached you anyway, across years and miles and all the noise of everything else that has happened since. In a ways, you are part of it now. Maybe the next time you look at an old photograph of Elvis on stage, you will not only see the pose and the costume, you will wonder who he was looking at in that exact second. You will remember that at least once he was not just playing to the crowd, he was answering a letter. And maybe, just maybe, you will think about the rings in your own life, the people you walk past, the stories you have not asked about, the small promises you have made and then buried under busyness. Because the most haunting question this story leaves behind is not what happened that night. You know that now. The question is much harder. How many rings, how many raised hands, how many quiet pleas do we overlook every day? Because the show we are putting on for the world feels too important to stop. That is where Elvis leaves us, in the pause between the last note and the next song, wondering what we would do if we saw that ring ourselves. You have just heard about one woman in a crowd of thousands who refused to be invisible, and one man on a stage who finally chose to see her. If you had been there, would you have noticed the way his voice broke, or would it have sounded like just another song? Tell me in the comments whose ring you might be ignoring in your own life. I read these stories the way Elvis read his letters.